The next speaker that's going to be coming up here is a great friend of mine. He's been involved with our honor guard for many years. He's from our community, Bob Sharp. He flew as a crew chief on a gunship in Vietnam. He's very involved currently in his VFW, where he lives in Albert Lea, but he's always been involved here for many, many years. Back in 1981, when I got involved with the Honor Guard, Bob and Gerald Schmidt were one of the two people that, and Ray Schadl were a couple of the people that recruited me to come and join this outfit. And Bob had sat on the board there for many years. He was our treasurer for many years. And now he's done the same thing in the Albert Lea area. So just a very passionate man, and we're very fortunate to have him today as our speaker. Thank you, Bob, for being here.
Well, I tell you, this is going to be a tough act to follow. And I know from now on that if I'm going to be the speaker, I'm going to be the first one. These guys covered a lot of my ground. So I'm really proud to be here. You people ought to be proud of this town. I'll tell you, when I first came here back there in 1975, I got a job with a construction company outside of town here. And I'm driving up Highway 4. Oh boy, no, I'm in trouble. Anyway, I'm coming up Highway 4, and there's a sign out there that said "Sleepy Eye" so many miles up the road. And I thought, who in their right mind would ever move to a town named Sleepy Eye? But you have to know the history so you know what's going on. So, like my friend Rick said, I've been really honored. I was way back in '81. We started forming up the honor guard because we didn't have any uniforms, we didn't have any money or nothing, and so we started from scratch. And I'm proud to say I was a charter member, and I ended up. I wanted to be the president, but I didn't get elected president that night. So I got elected to the treasurer, and I found out the president doesn't do anything. The treasurer has to do it all. So I ended up being the treasurer for the honor guard for 30 consecutive years. I met this lady from Albert Lea, and I was never going to get married again, and I met her, and I decided that I was going to get married again. So I moved down there, and I told Rick and these guys, I said, you're going to have to find another treasurer because I'm moving to Albert Lea. And they said, well, it's not that far. You can do it, can't you, Bob? So I did it I said, okay, I'll do it one more year because I've got 29 years in, and next year will be my 30th year, and I'm going to retire and collect my pension. And they said, good luck with that. So anyway, like I said, this is a beautiful place, and you got to be really proud of it. I'm proud to be asked to come here and speak today. As you may, and all this has been hashed over before, presented to you, but as you may recall, today is September 11th, the 21st anniversary known as 9/11. The day that the United States was attacked by terrorists using airliners to bring down the Twin Towers in New York City. And many of you may remember where you were and what you were doing that terrible day. And I myself can tell you I was standing in Dr. Dean Brinkman's office, and he and I couldn't believe what was coming over the radio. Didn't know what was happening. The Twin Towers were lost, and just recently we lost Dr. Dean also. Another tragic loss. He was an awesome man, a dear friend, and we'll truly miss him. And I want to thank you for taking time to join us today for the dedication of this truly fitting memorial to the veterans of the Vietnam War. The first American died there in 1961, and it ended in 1965. And like I said, well, now you know who I met. My name is Bob Sharp. And to tell you how and why I became so honored to be here speaking today, this is my history. I went to aviation school in Fort Rucker, Alabama also, like Mr. Yanni. The first aircraft I crewed was an H-13 Sioux helicopter sitting on a trailer back there that had a a crew chief, but he was on the ground. He never got to fly. And then I was so privileged I got to go to another school and went to Huey School and found out that there was a critical MOS. I thought, what the devil is that? It was a critical military occupational skill, and we all went to Vietnam. So I'm very proud to be able to say that I was a member of this community as I worked here, lived here, raised my family here for 37 years. I have family here that lives here today yet. I have children, grandchildren, and now I have 4 great-grandchildren that are here. My wife Bonnie is buried here in Home Cemetery and Soldiers Rest, where I will be someday also. Proud to say that I've made many wonderful friends in the years that I was here, and it was a great place to live. Many years ago, 1963, I was in the U.S. Army training in Fort Benning, Georgia, flying as a crew chief mechanic. I was a flying crew chief. And we flew thousands of hours, 18 months, in fact, moving troops in and out of simulated battle sites. And then one day in September 1964, I received orders to accompany the 62nd Assault Helicopter Company to a place called Vinh Long. It was in the Republic of South Vietnam. I did not know where that was. I'd never heard of it. I thought maybe I was sleeping in school that day, but looked it up and it was on the world globe. You know, we used to have globes in school that you could look at. We didn't have to look at a laptop or whatever. But the name of it was, when I went to school, was French Indochina. And there's a reason for that. The French were there, they occupied it. Before that, the Japanese occupied it. And before that, there's wars been going on there since written history. Like they mentioned before, the HU-1 Iroquois is U.S. Army designation, but nicknamed the Huey. And it was heavily used in the war. It had many duties, and it was mainly used by the U.S. Army. But like they said, the other branches of the military had them also. And the primary use was hauling troops into battle and pulling them back out again. And that's what my ship did. And we were called slicks, as we only had 2 handheld M60 machine guns that were manned by the crew chief on the left side. As you can see, this is the left side. We'd be sitting in the back door. We didn't have no doors on. You couldn't shoot through the doors. And the door gunner was on the right side. And we hauled ARVN troops mainly. That's Army of the Republic of Vietnam. We hauled American troops. And I'll bet a lot of you didn't know this. We also hauled ROK soldiers, ROK, Republic of Korea, into battle. And also Aussie troops that went into battle from Australia. They were some cool dudes. They were all members of the United Nations, and they all fought the communists to try to save that country from communist rule. As our many everyday jobs consisted of everything from hauling supplies and ammo, we hauled firewood, food, ducks, pigs, chickens, and families in and out of ARVN outposts. They were only accessible by air, and they needed everything brought into them. They were isolated and came under fire often. We hauled out the wounded and the dead, hauled in replacement troops, and the time and the day did not matter. I myself have well over 1,000 hours of combat flight time. I was awarded the Air Medal for Valor, and with 19 oak leaf clusters. Also numerous other medals that I'm not going to mention. But my first aircraft was a B model Huey. And this one up here, you can tell the B model only had one big window in the side. It was shorter. Well, then they came out with later models and that. But my B model, it was a slick ship. It had 17 different bullet holes in it from numerous times that we'd been fired on before it was finally brought to the ground and destroyed. The Huey is made mostly of aluminum, some steel, and a lot of plexiglass for the windshields and the windows. They are not armor clad. And they're very durable, but when hit in the critical area, they come down out of the sky. They were easily destroyed. It was a total number, Rick said over 12,000. I got a number of 11,827. That's pretty close. of Huey helicopters used in the Vietnam War. Of that 11,827, 5,086 were lost and destroyed while performing their jobs with the pilots and the crews that flew them. There were over 2,202 pilots killed, 2,704 crew members, being the crew chiefs and the gunners, were lost. But this does not include the pilots and the crew members that were injured and maimed for life in other crashes. The other Hueys were called gunships as they were heavily armed with quad 60s, the M60 machine guns. They had 4 mounted on 2 on each side, and they also had rocket pods. Plus they had the 2 door gunners, the crew chief and a door gunner with an M60. And they flew cover for the slick ships and protected us as we landed to pick up the soldiers, the wounded and the dead, and got back out under fire. And like they said earlier, these were also used as medevac, and their radio call sign was dust off. They flew in many times under heavy fire to pull out the many wounded and rush them to battlefield hospitals. And that is why this aircraft is so fitting for this memorial, as it displays the readily recognizable logo of the Red Cross. It signifies and reminds all of us, veterans of all our buddies and comrades, that their lives were saved by their quick recovery from the battlefield. Many of the dust-off aircraft and crew were lost as they were doing their job. Many of the veterans today still recognize the all so familiar whoop whoop of the rotor blades as they hear the chopper coming in to pick them up and take them home. This is how grateful they were. Many an infantryman told me, "You guys are nuts flying around in this tin can." And I said, I always told them I wouldn't want your job either, buddy. It was funny how I always felt safer as soon as we would lift off, like I was meant to be in the air. I was in 2 crashes in the trees in Georgia as we were practicing troop lifts at that time. The Hueys were new then and needed some engine modifications. We were shot down once in Vietnam, and we no more than hit the rice paddy dike and skidded into the mud. And we slid in, and we were out and grabbed our machine guns and our weapons, and we ran. If you can imagine, through the knee-deep mud and slop, trying to run, carrying your junk. And we climbed into our sister ship as she landed to pick us up. Even after all the crashes, I would jump in the first aircraft I couldn't be gone again. I believe we all felt that way. It was our job and our life. And by the Huey and God's grace, we were saved. And now we need to remember all the men and women that did not survive and come home. Over 58,000 lost their lives and over 150,000 were wounded. Many are lost yet every day to suicide and many to the effects of Agent Orange. The trauma and the suffering continues for all of us. The effects on our military personnel are no different from the Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. That's why they call them wars. They're all very terrible and life-changing. And now I'm going to share a true story with you. My mother's oldest brother volunteered during the Second World War. He served over 5 years, so many months and so many days, as he would tell you. He knew down to the hour. He was in the Battle of the Bulge in the Argonne Forest in Germany. And he was from Comfrey, Minnesota. And he was enlisted in the Army. And during training, he made a friend from a town up north called Reamer, Minnesota. He was a platoon sergeant, and his buddy was working in headquarters with a desk job when they were over there. I suppose in a tent someplace, doing paperwork and that. And he begged him to let him come along on patrol. Well, he finally gave in and took his friend along, as they were told that it would be a simple patrol, no action expected. And they went on patrol and walked right into a machine gun nest and were pinned down and couldn't move. My uncle, the platoon sergeant, took action. He exposed himself to the heavy fire many times, firing his handheld machine gun so as to allow his men to move forward. They moved ahead, and then his buddy from Reamer was hit bad. Took a round through the eye, and it came out the back of his head behind his ear. They all thought he was mortally wounded and wanted to leave him, as they were still under fire, and it was futile to try to drag him along because he wasn't going to make it anyway. Well, my uncle, the platoon sergeant, picked him up, and they fought their way to safety. They then got him on a stretcher and off to a field hospital, never knowing whatever happened to his friend. And he wondered for many years. And for this action, he received a Silver Star. Well, to go on, and many years later, my uncle was back home, survived the war, got home, living in Medelia, Minnesota. He was married and had a family. And years later, they would go on vacation and stay at a resort on Lake Roosevelt by Outing, Minnesota. One afternoon, they decided to go for a ride. Ended up in Reamer, Minnesota. He wondered if anyone there had any recollection of his old friend from the war. He parked, went into a business there, and asked someone if anyone there had ever heard of this man, and possibly if maybe he had some relatives. You'll get a kick out of this, Dave Carr. They said, "Oh my, yes. He's the president of the bank across the street." Can you imagine the joy that he felt to learn that his friend had survived? He walked across the street, and there was his old friend. They continued their friendship for many, many years, and then his old friend passed away. My uncle's oldest daughter took him to the Reamer for the funeral. They got there, got out of the vehicle, and walked up to the church. There were a group of young men in suits and ties standing there, evidently the casket bearers. Hang on, here we go. And they asked him, "Who are you?" And he told them who he was, and they were so very happy to see him. They explained that they were the grandsons of the deceased friend, and so very proud of my uncle, because if it had not been for him, none of them would ever have been born. Just think of that. We just take our lives for granted. So today we stand here and remember the soldiers that were saved by the dust-off aircraft, and we remember the many who were lost and left wives and little children, and there were many of them. And we think of the many who never got to exist. Only God knows them. I was told to keep this short and sweet, but if you ever know me, I've never had a lack of words. So I still have a couple of things to tell you. I ran out of paper. Anyway, we'll have our sorrowful days and whatever, but if anyone ever asks you why you're crying, you just tell them, "I'm not crying. That's memories running down my face." And Ronald Reagan once said, "Sometimes people look back on their lives and wonder if they have ever made a difference in this world." Well, I'll tell you this, a veteran never has to think about that. And now I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon, and how very nice it is to see all your familiar faces. Thank you all, and God bless America.